Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 351. In the wake of Halloween.
What did I do for Oh Hallows Eve?
Or, Oh Hallows Eve, as I guess some people call it. Can you really call that guy people? Anyways, it finally started getting cold outside. And you know what that means.
I'm afraid that my condition has left me cold to your pleas of mercy.
Get out those A5 Digipacks, because we're finally going to jump into some Paysage d'hiver. I've actually wanted to talk about this project for a while, but I wasn't ever really sure how to go about doing it given this show's format. However, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at condensing my analysis of the output of very long-winded bands over the past few episodes with all the funeral doom and whatnot. So I feel like I'm finally ready to tackle Paysage d'hiver. Since I started seriously listening to black metal around 2004, 2005-ish, Paysage has become one of the most celebrated black metal projects within the deeper levels of the underground. In fact, there was a time where it was pretty difficult to browse any black metal message boards without seeing at least one mention of Paysage d'hiver's work. When I first heard Paysage, the solo project of one Tobias Merkel, he was a little bit more famous at the time for being one of the guitarists in underground black metal darlings Dark Space.
The icy cold of space.
However, at least to my eyes, it seems nowadays Paysage d'hiver has eclipsed Dark Space in popularity, which is fine by me because, yeah, I like Dark Space, but I was always way more into Paysage d'hiver. That said, Paysage d'hiver is still a pretty intimidating band for a newer listener to get into. Depending on how you look at it, he's either got 2 full-length albums or something like 12 of them going back to 1998. I say something like 12 full-length albums because, yeah, 2020's Imwald and 2021's Geister are the only officially recognized full-length albums according to Tobias himself. But all these other albums that are listed as demos, most of them are 45 minutes to an hour long, and they all feature songs that aren't duplicated anywhere else. So to me, those are pretty much full-length albums. I don't really care what he says.
You're not even the real Ozzy Osbourne.
And honestly, I feel like listing those 2 newer releases as albums instead of demos is sort of a weird violation of pattern for Paysage d'hiver. But what do I know? I'm not in charge of what Tobias does. All of it is incredibly raw and cold sounding, ambient oriented black metal, with the main focus being on winter, cold, misanthropy, and mysticism. If you ask me, the easiest release to get into would probably be 2013's Das Tor, which to my ears at least condenses all the different facets of Paysage's sound into its most digestible form without sacrificing any of the things that make this project unique. Paysage could be very much described as a post-Burzum black metal project with its emphasis on rawness and layering of sounds. It's also very much a post-funeral doom sort of project, given Tobias's massive focus on texture and slowly, gradually introducing melodic elements into this sort of cosmic black metal soup. A lot of Paysage songs are built on a very simple sort of primitive black metal background riff over which he moves layers of sound in and out. As you're hearing right now, he does utilize keyboards, but the way he uses them is a lot closer to how Varg used them in Burzum than how a more typical sort of symphonic black metal band would use keyboards. There's a major focus on progressive revelation of sounds, like right here, pulling back the more blast-beating drums and tremolo pick guitars, replacing them with a doom metal backing riff, and then having this looping sort of funeral doom style melody ringing out over everything else. This goes on for quite a long time, almost repeating that melody like a mantra, before shifting up yet again into a more arpeggiated sort of melodic figure and removing the drums entirely to where it's just these waves of melody. Ironically, once the drums are gone and once he's switched up his picking style, this melody becomes a lot more black metal sounding and a lot less sort of black metal funeral doom fusion, and almost kind of takes on an In the Night Side Eclipse sort of character. And then the drums and the heavier black metal distorted guitars jump back in. That's the progressive revelation I'm talking about. Every time this music shifts, it's like the movement of tectonic plates on the Earth's mantle. It's a gradual but forceful way of writing a song. For some people, this mode of composition might be slow and boring at first listen. And yeah, if you're comparing it to more riff-o-rama style bands, where there's a whole progression of different quick ideas bouncing off of each other, it's gonna seem kind of boring. But if you ask me, looking at this music like that is a mistake. That's not what it's trying trying to do. Instead, what Paysage is going for is akin to what
Brett Stevens
calls immersion in the point itself. He used this to describe the music of Burzum, Dark Throne Circuit, Transylvanian Hunger, and I Shalt Become. It definitely applies here. It's less of a straightforward narrative progression, less of a hero's journey, beginning, middle, and end, climaxes, all that kind of thing, and more just meditations on stasis that expand outward and progressively reveal more ideas. Less of a straight line, more of an expanding circle. That is not to say, however, that Paysage d'Hiver does not possess any riffs. Okay, this ain't some boring drone doom stuff like Sun.
Q-15 shots fired.
Paysage is actually a very riff-heavy band, and honestly, a fairly catchy one if you can get around their headspace. It's not all just tremolo-picked, vaguely psychedelic, fast ambient black metal either. Quite a few of their songs have a healthy, percussive, almost death metal-like component to them, which kind of helps set them apart from a lot of other ambient black metal bands. This particular strain of thought stems all the way back to the very first Paysage release, that being 1998's Steineiche demo, which honestly, I would definitely consider to be an album. It's an hour and 12 minutes long.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
There's big chunks of this record that'll surprise you. Particularly the second song on the album, Der Balman. If someone were to play this to you in isolation, you might not even guess it was from a black metal album. You've got this wandering sort of jangly clean guitar played over super crushing doomy death metal riffs and very subtly orchestral style of percussion. Kind of just sounds like a funeral doom band for a decent chunk of the song's runtime. As the song progresses, it does start to get into more standard black metal territory, at least in terms of guitar technique, utilizing all these tremolo picking sections. But even those, this is way fucking heavier, darker, and grosser sounding than you would typically expect sort of wintry ambient black metal to sound. Then the chugs come back in, and you got this weird flanged out clean guitar thing going on over top of it. Almost sounds like if the British band Esoteric decided to start playing ambient black metal. I don't really ever see people talk about this like really heavy funeral doom component to a lot of Paysage d'Hiver's work, but I find it to be one of the major things that sets them apart in the ambient black metal field. For me, the peak of this more percussive style occurred on their second demo, or if you ask me, their second full-length release, because again, it's like an hour long. That being 1998's Schottengong with the song Moloch.
I denounce anti-Semitism in all its forms, and I stand with my friends in the Jewish community.
This is one of my favorite ambient black metal songs of all time. At certain points, Steineiche sounded a little bit artificial to my ears. That's been completely corrected on this release. This shit just sounds heavy, gross, and perfect. Very slow introduction of sonic layers, in this case the drums. I really appreciate the sort of wandering feel to the guitars too. Perfect synthesis of black metal and funeral doom. And then we start to get a little bit more death metal-y. The guitars get a bit chuggier. We've still got one doing ambient wandering, but the other one's almost doing, I guess you could call it ambient death metal with the way it's chugging. From there it opens up into a much more death metal sounding riff. In fact, you could almost call this a death metal song reinterpreted through ambient black metal aesthetics. This little turnaround bit here is a little bit more pure black metal, but then it leads into what I can only describe as the ambient black metal equivalent of a slam death riff. I get this riff stuck in my head all the time. It's so fucking heavy, and it doesn't really sound like anything else I've ever heard. Maybe some of the nastier, heavier moments of Ruins of Everast, but even that's a stretch. I'm okay with saying this is a pretty much utterly unique song, not only in metal as a whole, but even amongst other Paysage d'Hiver songs. This one's always stood out for me. It's like if Unleashed or Dismembered just got really into Burzum. As more and more Paysage demos or albums or whatever you wanted to call them started to come out, a little bit of that death metal and funeral doom feel would be stripped away successively with each release, but Tobias would still continue to experiment with utilizing a more percussive sound in an ambient black metal context, kind of showcasing that aspect of his influences alongside the more Burzumic tremolo pick stuff. Real good example of this comes off of one of the best and most iconic Paysage demos, albums, whatever, that being Winterkälte with the song Ich starre.
약간 잡다한 것들이 다 들어가 있어요. 어디에 넣게 되면.
That's right, we get to talk about one of the more controversial aspects of Paysage d'Hiver, that being Tobias's penchant for utilization of ambient wind noise. On certain demos, albums, whatever, particularly 2004's Nacht, he really kind of goes overboard at times. I think on Winterkälte, he does a decent enough job of utilizing ambience without getting too crazy, and it does blend into the music in kind of an interesting way, with the guitar distortion gradually arising out of the windstorm interludes between tracks in suitably cinematic fashion. So right here, this stuff you're listening to right now, this is much more stereotypical Paysage d'Hiver type stuff in terms of aesthetics and style. That said, it still has a real sense of percussive weight to it, much more so than is typical for ambient black metal. The more funeral doom type stuff has been completely subsumed by black metal, but there are still trace elements of that genre, particularly in the guitar layering like you're hearing right now, with that cleaner, janglier sort of guitar kind of hovering over the very heavy, droning, Dark Throne Circle quintessence style riff. One of the most interesting fusions of black metal and doom metal I've ever heard, actually. Really dense stuff. And then we bring in the keyboards, which again, completely different from what you would hear from your standard sort of symphonic black metal band. Much more in line with the kind of stuff you might hear in Burzum or even a lot of 70s electronica from the German-speaking world. Quite a bit of Klaus Schulze and Tangerine Dream going on here, both in terms of aesthetics and song structuring. In fact, Tobias might just be the most adept out of all the metal musicians I've heard that try to incorporate that sort of thing into a more extreme metal context. As spaced out and psychedelic and strange as it all gets, it still remains unquestionably black metal. So that's one major aspect of Paysage d'Hiver's sound down, that being the really heavy percussive doom metal, occasionally death metal type stuff. But as you're probably already aware, if you've ever heard any Paysage d'Hiver before, there's just as much blasting intense black metal shit going on. One of the best examples of this more purely black metal style comes on the Kristall und Isa album from the year 2000 with the song Der Kristall ist Eis. I mean shit dude, this song even uses the Burzum drum beat.
Ice, ice, baby.
To great effect before the blast beats jump in. This is some fucking intense shit right here. But at least to my ears, it maintains that spaced out feel so common to Paysage d'Hiver's more doom metal inflected work. Speaking of which, I think I can hear some funeral doom guitar in the distance. There it is, cutting through the black metal haze as the rhythm guitar riffs shift from hateful misanthropy to frozen melancholia. I've seen a lot of people describe Paysage d'Hiver as dabbling in psychedelic music. You can definitely hear that with the overlaid guitars that we've got going on right here, very trance-inducing. And then it fades out into ambience with some wind and snow walking noises, but not in a tasteless way. It actually works for the song. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and when the black metal cuts back in, it's given a grander sense of emotional resonance. Starting out first as just a lone guitar line, then adding on vocals, kind of droning on, building tension for the inevitable reintroduction of all the more extreme elements. See that right there? That's what's known in the business as that good shit, my brother.
Fantastic album, man. Let me borrow it.
No, my brother. You've got to buy your own.
So yeah, don't get too worried if you get some kind of allergy to doom metal. There's plenty of fast, blasty, intense shit going on with Paysage d'Hiver as well.
야, 날씨 날 완전 제대로 잡아.
That's a good point. If we're going to talk about the different component elements of the Paysage d'Hiver sound, we got to talk about the dungeon synth. Or, more accurately, the lack thereof. Because there are a lot of keyboards going on in Paysage d'Hiver, and he's even got 2 albums, demos, whatever, that are entirely synth-oriented in nature, that being 1998's Die Festung and 2007's Einsamkeit. Those are both all keyboards, nothing else. But they don't really even approach what we would call standard dungeon synth nowadays in terms of how they sound. Instead, much like what I mentioned earlier in the context of Tobias using keyboards inside his more black metal oriented tracks, these keyboard focused albums have a lot more in common with 70s German and more broadly European electronic music. You know, your Klaus Schulzes, your Tangerine Dreams, your Jean-Michel Jarre's. And this in turn is a big part of why so much of Paysage's material sounds so different different from many other ambient black metal projects. None of the synth patches he uses really mimic any sort of medieval, Renaissance, or Baroque era instrumentation. Instead, they're almost all self-consciously artificial sounding. Usually, the closest you'll get to a quote-unquote real instrument is a bit of electric piano, but a lot of it is just sort of a keyboard drone note. Compositionally, these tracks also tend to be pretty far removed from dungeon synth, as you're hearing right now. This particular track, Prince Frost off the Die Festung album, it's more like you just get a chord hitting and then dissolving into like an unraveling sequencer sort of thing. And personally, yeah, I love dungeon synth, but it's cool to see black metal artists doing synth stuff that isn't strictly dungeon synth. And historically, this sort of 70s electronic stuff has been as big a part of classic black metal, if not bigger, than the more stereotypical dungeon synth stuff. I mean, for fuck's sakes.
Oh, for fuck's sakes.
The intro to Mayhem's 1987 Death Crush EP was composed by Konrad Schnitzler from Cluster. And that guy was an old school German electronic musician that was doing stuff like this back in the mid-70s. Not to mention the Burzum track that you're hearing in the background right now that's been slightly remixed is a pretty clear Klaus Schulze homage. And of course, Fenries's Neptune Towers side project, basically being him trying his hand at creating Tangerine Dream style stuff.
Ding 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 on
So you take all of these different elements, the surprising level of brutality, the slight influence from death metal and funeral doom metal, the expansion of Burzum style ambient black metal technique, and the 70s electronic influences. You put them all together, you basically got what Paysage Diver does, which, as I've hopefully convinced you of over the course of this episode, is pretty damn good shit. Alright, so this here is
Mountain Lightning. Hey, Siri, I didn't ask for your shit. Knock it the fuck off.
the first track on the first official Paysage Diver full-length album, that being 2020's Involved, and hopefully you can tell why I don't really make a hardline distinction between Paysage's full-lengths and his demos, because they basically sound pretty damn similar. But this track in particular is pretty cool, because not only is it a really good Paysage Diver song, but as you're hearing right now, it shows off all the different elements of Paysage's sound, working together in concert. The heaviness, the melancholic ambient black metal, and the very 70s German electronic music style sequencer melody kind of looping over all of it. The shifts between riffs and tones are gradual but very weighty, kind of like the movement of tectonic plates that I mentioned way back towards the beginning of the episode. And underneath all of it, you got that very Burzum-esque, repetitive, trance-like drum beat. Here comes another one of those really big, weighty changes. I really like the guitar sound in particular on this song, especially when it goes up into the higher registers. It reminds me a lot of Strid from Norway, who are one of my favorite demo-level, semi-obscure black metal bands. Paysage Diver, I'd argue, are still pretty obscure as far as mainstream black metal goes, but Tobias has definitely been building a pretty dedicated following over the past couple decades with this stuff. I have seen some people on the internet over the years express annoyance with Paysage, thinking it's all just some kind of trendy boutique black metal thing. I don't really agree. I think he's got a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, that Involved album, it's over 2 hours long, spread over 2 CDs, and I can listen to it the whole way through without getting bored, so that's got to count for something. He's actually got another giant 2 CD full-length album coming out in less than a week, which I, of course, already pre-ordered, because Paysage Diver's fucking awesome. Hopefully I've managed to convince you of that over the course of this episode, but even if I haven't, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did anyways, and I'll see you next time.
You're not even the real King Cobra JFS. Oh wait, I did. That was my message. Huh?